Maddie, you can see the screen, right? It's still showing?
Yep.
Awesome.
Yep. Hi, everyone who's joining. Thanks so much for being here. We'll get started in a few minutes. This is awesome. Sounds like a lot of people are introducing themselves in the chat. Welcome. Okay, so I think we'll go ahead and kick it off here. Welcome to Austin Design Week 2020. We are so glad that you're here. My name is Maddie Huey, and I'm on the ADW team this year. You can see on this slide that you can connect with us and share your experiences over the week by tagging us on social media. There's also some notes on this first slide. Go back one. Sorry, the first one. Okay, cool. And then if you haven't already, we encourage you to join the ADW Slack workspace. Please check the Zoom chat where we'll be putting that link and several other resources. We encourage you to continue the conversation there. There are free events today. It's the last day. So we encourage you to check the schedule and join us for more. And next slide, please. Great. And then lastly, we want to say a huge thanks to our generous sponsors for making this year happen. At the end of the event, you'll be asked to take a brief survey, and we'd love to hear from you. So I'm going to pass it over to Bonnie and get this event started.
Super. So glad to have you all here and so glad to see you already engaged. What I wanted to introduce before we go into the content of this presentation is the spirit of experimentation. I think as we move through this kind of disruptive moment and are trying to figure out what the future holds, and we don't know for sure, we have some ideas. The important way to know what the future holds is to start to conduct experiments and see what works and what doesn't work and tune these. So consider this prototype of sorts, and many of you probably have been to conferences where there is a really engaged chat, but we want to kind of put that on hyperdrive and say, let's have all of us engage in a meaningful conversation that runs parallel to this conversation to see if this is something that detracts, contributes, has you more engaged or not. So at the end of this, we'll reflect on it a little bit. But again, as we conduct experiments around the hybrid, I'm actually going into the office later today to hack a conference room to start to think about how do we do hybrid work and make it successful. This is this other experiment. So please engage in chat. You'll see we're going to have some pop-up questions during. So please ask questions, answer our questions, challenge us. Our speakers are not going to be watching the chat. They're going to be focused on talking. So don't feel like they're not listening to you, but they'll have a full plate talking. But I'll be watching it and I may pop in occasionally to bring some of that conversation into the dialogue, but we'll certainly reflect on it at the end. So Nana, I'm going to pass it off to you now.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you so much. And thanks everybody for joining us today. It's Friday, woohoo, Friday the 13th, no less. So we're super happy to be here and to start this discussion. And I'm going to do just some quick introductions here. Myself, I've been doing this for over 26 years and really focus on workplace. And here at Gensler, I am the co-lead for technology practice area. So that means connecting with all our regionals. We have 10 regions at Gensler and really focus with technology and how those companies are doing, what the trends are, and all sorts of feedback that we get from them. And just super happy to be here. Jennifer Mejia, one of our senior designers, she is a customer relation leader in our office, and she's phenomenal with clients. So happy that you could join us, Jennifer. And then Bonnie, why don't you introduce yourself? You've got such an amazing resume, so I'm going to put you on the spot there.
Oh, well, Now there's a lot of pressure, but no. So yeah, I actually my background is in human-centered design and ethnographic research. I was at Frog as an insights director for just under a decade. Have had my own consultancy, but also have taught how kind of bringing design into business practices at McCombs for 3 years as well. So I'm glad to be here. And my work here at Gensler, I co-lead our consulting practice in our South Central region. And my goal is to really bring the point of view of kind of humans and the kind of qualitative perspective into the built environment, thinking holistically, not just about space, but about both digital interactions, culture, and organization, and how those all work together to create a holistic experience. Very much the subject of the conversation today.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Fantastic. So, just want to give a quick summary of what we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about the research that we have been conducting, and then we're going to, Jennifer will dive into what we're seeing as design opportunities and potential trends and some of the things that we see being developed. So we're going to get started. Again, please chime in if you have any questions, and Bonnie will let us know what's going on in the chat. So as you all know, everybody, it's like March 20th. I think everybody ended up going home, and no idea whether we were going to be back or not. And so it was certainly a difficult time, a time of change. Everybody had to pivot and figure out how quickly they could set up their home office and start working from home. And, our workplace, it was altered, it was changed, and many of us have not been back to the office. It's going on 8 months now. And so we've learned so much from this time. We've learned that we can actually be just as productive at home. But it also depends on your setup. It depends on, what generation you're in. We know we've gotten so much information about that it's just fascinating. And, it's making us become more lean in the way we think. And so one of the things we started to see is how people are just wondering, when will I go back to the office? Am I going to catch COVID? Is the space safe enough for me? What will the purpose be of the office? I've seen titles of newspaper taglines, "The office is dead," So I think there's so many questions, but I think in the last couple of months, we've been seeing some different trends and different directions, which is great. It's actually more positive than people think. So at Gensler, we developed a research team about 15 years ago, and we believe that design is really what improves people's life. We can utilize design for that, and having this research and the data to help us understand what people are thinking, what new trends could be happening, is kind of at the center core, so that we can build and design better spaces. One thing you'll notice is when these reports were issued, there was a gap in between, maybe a couple of years in between. And as you can start to see later, you start to see more frequency. And that's because there's just so much rapidly evolving that we felt compelled that we needed to issue more information. So with this data, we have been able to really assess what's happening globally. We did this research right off the bat, about a month and a half after we all went to work from home. And we did our initial survey, globally, France, the UK, the US, and Australia. We just did our second research, which was just issued about 2 weeks ago. So we're still sort of learning all the data that's coming out of it, but it's just fascinating what we're seeing. Lots of lessons. We know that the working from home aspect is become really productive, highly productive, but it's not equally productive, and it all depends on the generations. And we know that the home office is not equitable, right? Some folks have a big house where you can have a home office, and others are sharing their space with others, or maybe you have little ones, maybe you're doing virtual classes. And so we know that there's no real equity right now that's happening. Companies, especially in the tech world, they're starting to, or they've been immediately started to help employees with stipends so that they would have their home set up as close to their home, to their office. So it's really kind of fascinating. So this is really interesting. We surveyed over 2,300 companies, over 10 industries, and all 3 generations. And you know, just the feedback is incredible. And we surveyed folks from top senior leadership and to managers and administrative folks. So the snapshot is just amazing. So folks are saying that, you know, they really, really would like to have a hybrid working model. And that's that 52% that you see there. That is based on our second briefing that we just got. So at the initial onset, you know, whether it was March or April, folks were saying, yeah, I can do this. I can be just as productive. I don't need to go in the office. And then as time went by, folks were having fatigue, you know, and we see a little bit of that. And, you know, people are realizing that, hey, you know what, it would be great to come into the office a couple of days. And it's great that I don't have to sit there in traffic and have this long commute. My life is actually easier and better because you actually are spending a little bit more time with family because you're not in those long commutes. However, we know that for collaboration, it gets a little challenging to do it from home. So just thought I'd share a little bit of this. It's just fascinating how many folks actually want to be in the office. And it varies by industries. We know that the tech folks tend to be very used to working from anywhere, whether it's home or the coffee shop, and where you've got professional services and financial services, and even media or consumer goods, they really want to come into the office and have a little bit more collaboration. So we see those percentages changing a bit. So we have learned that human contact is one of the biggest things that people miss the most. You know, it's that connection, it's the collaboration, it's that moment you run into somebody in the stairs and you start talking about a project and something pops up. You know, it's just not the same. You know, how do you create that when you're working from home virtually? You almost have to make this extra effort to make that happen. And so also sharing knowledge and staying up to date on what people are doing is different. We know that young knowledge workers learn so much faster by osmosis, right? You're sitting right next to someone at a desk and you're hearing their conversation, and you're enriched by that information, and you might interrupt them and ask them questions. Well, you can't do that anymore. So you have to make this extra effort, which is, it's interesting. So as I mentioned earlier, you know, younger generations are probably the ones that are less productive at home. And if you think about where they are in their career, they might live, you know, have roommates. There's disruption with that, or may have little ones, or maybe have, you know, elementary school level children that are on virtual calls, and it's completely disruptive. So we know that based on the feedback is that they are really wanting to be back in the office more than you would say, you know, the baby boomers, where they have, you know, no children at home, they've got their home office set up and they don't have to commute. So they're saying, I'm pretty good over here, versus the millennials that really want to be in the office. So just wanted to remind you guys, let us know if you have any thoughts, comments. Is that, do you guys feel the same, you know, based on your own experience?
I'm going to just chime in here and say, it's pretty interesting watching the comments coming in. There's a lot of mixed experiences of going in and staying home, some going in part-time now, 1 day a week or more, some who haven't been back to the office since March 20th. But also people are, you know, echoing some of the themes we heard in our research. People definitely are interested in hybrid, and not just saying hybrid, but also choice. So not having that dictated, but hearing a lot that, you know, some of the youth, younger people are wanting to be able to connect, and seeing the need to also be able to mentor. And I love a comment that said, serendipity is what I miss the most. So again, connections, and those connections that aren't planned for as well. So thanks you all. Keep the conversation going. It's wonderful to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, that's great, Bonnie. So, you know, as Bonnie was saying, this desire to connect and to have your close connections and collaboration, we know that collaboration results innovation. And so it's so important to have those moments and still continue with that. So we know the office is relevant, but it's just the change of that people are saying, hey, you know, I want some sort of flexibility. And I think that's what we're going to see a lot more of. So this is another interesting feedback about where people are most productive. And this, in this case, is really dealing with how productive you are in the office and when and why. And it's really about collaboration. You're coming in with a purpose to your office now, and, you know, getting something achieved with another colleague is sort of the highest percentage here. Where at home, it's more sort of a productive production type of work, a focused work. What's also interesting is, you know, the technology setup. In the recent briefing for technology, we learned that for technology folks, the #1 most important asset is the IT help desk, which is curious and interesting, where the other industries are saying, I want parking in my building, and I don't want to deal with you know, the challenges of trying to park in our office. So it's interesting to see the differences between industries. So, you know, working where they can see people from their space, but they still want privacy. And privacy really means I want to be able to be in a safe place, a place that feels comfortable and I feel safe. You know, with COVID, people are worried, you know, am I going to sit in a space, open area where, you know, maybe somebody else doesn't know that they have it and can affect them. And so it's really about, you know, seeing others and still having that distance from others. And then just saving time and commutes. I mean, it's just really kind of interesting, you know, this particular data. One of the other things we're seeing is that people want to return to the office and, you know, they want a little bit more space. They don't want to really share the desk. We asked if they were willing to share a desk or do hoteling style in return for more flexibility. And it varied by industry, but it was interesting to see that most people don't really care to share a desk. I think it goes back to this idea of, you know, cleanliness and who's cleaning, what are the protocols that are occurring. And this idea of, you know, companies supporting this virtual work mode, this hybrid work model is key. So Bonnie, do we have any other questions, anything that you want to add to this?
No, I think keep going. I'm going to tell everyone, make sure you set your setting, if comfortable, to panelists and attendees, because there's lots of good comments and some of you are only sending them to the panelists. So if you're comfortable sharing them with everyone in the room, everyone can see the rich set of inputs and thoughts that are being shared.
Yeah.
Let's keep rolling. Yeah.
All right. Fantastic. So we know that we're going to be going into this hybrid work model. So it's becoming more clear in the last couple of months. We see a lot more activity with companies thinking about the strategy. How do we do this? Do we need to reduce our footprint? And what we're seeing is that companies aren't necessarily so quick to reduce their square footage. What we're seeing is people asking, how do we remodel? How do we redesign the space so that it has purpose, so that it's flexible, so that people can come in and select, you know, space to work in? And Jennifer will actually dive into the design aspect in the next few slides. So what will the future look like? And this part, you know, I mean, I wish I had a crystal ball, but you know, thank God for the research and the information that, you know, we can tap into our colleagues, for instance, in Greater China, Shanghai, and have some great conversations. They've been back to work in late March. And so we can start to see what they're doing. Obviously, each region has their own culture and their own way of doing things, but we do see that they really embrace technology as sort of an extended hand to the way they work and the way they live, actually. So I think we're gonna, see how the home can be more equitable. Companies are gonna help employees have the proper setup, not just ergonomically, but just having the right tools. Many companies are given stipends, for monthly data or internet connections so that it's faster, because we know that's always been challenging. And then, how do you stay connected at work? How will that work out when you come in and set up a meeting with colleagues? Will you be able to use your phone and readily, connect with folks that are already in the office? So, and we know wellness is going to play a big role in this in the future, and how to balance this work model, this new hybrid environment. So, Jennifer, you want to dive into some of those design ideas there? Bonnie, I guess you have some.
Yeah, I was going to say, this theme of wellness, and for sure, everyone has different experiences, but the ability to be productive and to have that kind of space to really explore at home has been helpful. Obviously, we have designers on the call being Design Week, but especially for designers who need that space. There's a couple of comments there about that. I also think that when it comes to wellness, the challenges of working from home and finding work-life balance, at least for me, didn't play out quite as I anticipated. I thought a hybrid might allow for more work-life balance, or work from home might allow for that. But interestingly, a lot of people are commenting, as I've experienced, that working from home causes a lack of boundaries, whether that's rolling straight out of bed to your laptop, or it's the fact that you're just in back-to-back without as many breaks as you experience in the office. So I think wellness, while we think about it in terms of our health and COVID and sickness, also mental health and being able to find the right balance is emerging in the chat as well. Thanks to everyone for sharing your thoughts. Jennifer, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you. Well, it's incredibly interesting to be able to give this presentation and have this really live, ongoing feed of responses from you all. So thank you so much, because what we'd really like to do today is to engage those points within our presentation. So what we want to talk about today is all the research and all the data that we've learned over the last 6 to 8 months is really culminating within a number of opportunities that we're excited to consider and bring in as a part of the workplace of the future. So here we're talking about this new era of choice and autonomy. The name of the game here is choice. We've been talking about choice within the workplace specifically, but now we're really talking about how we bring that choice between the home and the work and those spaces in between. Additionally, we've got, this opportunity. It's really looking for that silver lining to turn what's really become a crisis in our country and worldwide into an opportunity. Our workplace as we know it is changing, and I think we've all come to the place of accepting that and understanding that it's okay. And let's look at what those experiences are going to become. The more that we're able to get together and engage in these variety of ways is going to create and cultivate innovation and just taking forth our cultures and our work-life balance into a way that we've never experienced before. So what we'd like to take a look at is the idea of the people, the place, and the technology all coming together. And really, it's taking the moment of looking at purpose, which has everything to do with the people and place of the workspace. It's the data, the technology, the software. How are we embedding that into our daily life? Because that's exciting. It's the shiny new, iPhones that are coming out of the different technologies, and we're implementing that into brand new ways of how we utilize space. And then also the user experience, how we're transforming the experience of just coming into the office, speaking to the receptionist, and then maybe being ushered into a conference room. There are very new ways that we are now able to experience the space that's going to engage and delight us all. So what does this mean for the future of the office? Let's discuss how we can take some of these goals, some of this research, and really make the space outstanding in the built environment. So we'll talk about some of these opportunities. So incredibly, the monkey in the room, if you will, of the home is office, office is home, really blending the idea of when we're all working from home, we need to have that spirit of whomever you're working for. And so we talk about that home in the office box. Maybe your organization has given you a stipend to, update your technology, lighting, whether it's panels. We're looking at everyone's environments. It might not just be the family of four, but you have folks that have roommates or, just a different family dynamic. And so we're looking at companies, we're seeing a lot of this come about. Then also talking about the home as office. Let's talk about it within the office. There's going to be different types of spaces. So as we talk about our rest and reset, this wellness, this concept that we continue to talk about is emerging as a really important concept within the workspace. So then next slide. Within the open office, this image is really interesting because with the dynamic furniture opportunities, our furniture manufacturers are providing all sorts of different solutions. They have had to really get the best of the best in the last 6 months or so. And so they're coming to the market with some amazing solutions. But the idea here is flexibility. Within the open office environment, you have opportunities to get into a smaller huddle space. Also from a conference or a collaboration point for teams, technology is really infusing these spaces. And so there's a lot to kind of take and pick apart here in this slide. But what's important is impromptu nature of how folks are collaborating, because we're not at home or we're not at the office traditionally 40 hours a week. Next slide.
I just wanted to add to this, and also the idea of making spaces so that they're equitable in the office. This was starting to happen before COVID, but now that COVID has put sort of on fast speed mode, where you've got folks that whether you're in a wheelchair or whether you're, have some kind of disability, the idea of having inclusivity in the workplace is really at the forefront, not just this flexible working mode, with technology and having these sort of hybrid meetings. It's really about how to improve the space and make it equitable for everybody. So it's really interesting what we're starting to see and the questions that clients are asking us.
That's right. So we talk about our connected kitchen and the workplace, the work cafes. This combination of the two has really become a large trend in past, but now it means that much more for us to be able to come together as a community, have a cup of coffee, socially distanced if necessary, but to really pull together those casual work settings. The virtual office here is also being reimagined because it might be that I'm going into the kitchen to grab my lunch, but I also want to sit down and virtually connect with a coworker. Maybe they told us that they were going to have lunch at the same time. So there's a multitude of opportunities where technology and those opportunities to just have that casual interaction are incredibly important here. And so adaptive conferencing, this is a really interesting concept that we're seeing with this graphic. You're seeing that there is not a large boardroom table in the middle of this space. We're allowing opportunities for folks to huddle around a table, but also engage in a whiteboard, a technologically advanced opportunity that we haven't really seen in the past. And so what that's doing is engaging our folks, our team members that are at home, as well as within the office in person, and really creating an engaging environment that is going to work and be a solution for all. This is a really interesting just with the fitness studio, this is an interesting trend that we're seeing, or opportunity, where, you know, we're all used to seeing these, you know, the Apples and the high-tech firms that are providing fitness studios within their campuses. And now realizing that folks might not want to get together for a spin class or yoga. Now we're having an opportunity to broadcast with technology, broadcasting those classes across, whether it's the city or even in your own home, in your living room.
And this one, I mean, this slide is also very interesting. You know, we think a lot of what's happening in the indoor space, and then one of the trends that we're seeing, or the ask is, you know, how do we turn certain areas of the building? How do we adapt it to more open areas? And so we started to call it mid-space, because it's not really indoors, it's not really outdoors, it's somewhere in the middle. And this idea that you can, you know, carve an area from one of the floors, whether you're a high-rise or a low-rise type building, and you can create this space where you're on the outside. And, you know, we know that a lot of folks are really concerned about being indoors. And so how do you adapt a building or a space so that it can be conducive for multiple functions, and be able to connect with your colleagues and make it productive, and even, you know, schedule a meeting out there with some colleagues. So this is kind of a fascinating trend, and we know that a lot of companies are looking to spread to a more suburban area, because they have more flexibility in terms of adapting the building into a different kind of you know, floor plate, and add more balconies or outdoor areas.
We're definitely seeing on the chat a response to the indoor-outdoor spaces. So,
Or the mid-space.
that seems like a real need.
Yes.
And we're fortunate in Austin, at least, to have an amazing climate to be able to partake most of the year. So that's a great one. So the future is exciting. Y'all are seeing how much the opportunities for the workplace, for the home, this culmination of all the aspects coming together in a really amazing collision. And so we're excited about what the future is going to bring as we all collaborate and come together as employees, and for that human experience.
And how wellness is at the forefront of things, right? It's that flexibility, and just thinking about that work-life balance. Like Bonnie was saying, you know, we all ended up probably closer to 50 to 60 hours a week, just not realizing that you're doing. And it's really about having that discipline of when to cut it off, and, you know, helping each other with, whether it's, you know, by technology, helping us sort of stay that, you know, keep with that discipline.
So we know that there are some activities that are really better done in the office. You've got your creature comforts, you've got your team members there. And so the data is certainly showing that there are reasons that we all need to be back in the office, and we are looking at all of the opportunities at play here.
And mentoring, right? Learning. Learning and mentoring just doesn't really happen virtually, unless you're purposeful about doing it. But it's much easier in the office to be able to do that, come in and connect with colleagues and learn from each other.
That's right. So talking about equipping your people, when it comes to meetings, we've got a whole host of opportunities, but it's really about the human connection with all of the parts and pieces that we've talked about in those concentric circles. So what if we change the approach? We've all been used to that workstation-centric model, and we know that that is not going to work moving forward. And so as we've been discussing, this human experience centric with co-working, the home and the office, we talked about the commuting into the office, which is huge, especially in Austin. And so really making sure that we're feeding the souls of those that are in the community of your office and at home, thinking about, again, your spouses or your significant others and children. And so how that all is going to come together to feed into a well oiled machine holistically. So one of the last diagrams that we want to talk about is kind of a shift in the workplace ecosystem. We've talked about the status quo. We're all used to that environment of the main portion of work, the main activity is really concentration. Then we've moved to collaboration with connections, spaces where we can come together for impromptu collisions. And then now we're starting to see this working elsewhere come into that space. But really, what we're doing in the community outpost, as we're calling it, is what we're doing in the office. We're connecting, we're inspiring, we're innovating, and we're creating. And then luckily, with all of this transformation that's happened, we're able to piece in the working elsewhere. And all of these diagrams are kind of speaking to those kind of proportionate spaces to meet those goals.
So, all the data and how we get to the data is really about, how we work with technology. And so what we're seeing, from our colleagues in Asia and just the, post-COVID and how people are getting into spaces is all kind of at your fingertips, right? So we know there's a lot of apps that are being developed on how to bring folks back in the office in a safe manner. And it's really, about informing. We see data as becoming the new amenity. So that, if you're wanting to pop into the office on a Tuesday, you can check on your phone and see, hey, Susie's in the office today. I can pop in and meet with her. Or, you reserve a conference room. Maybe you have a team collaboration type of meeting that you want to conduct and reserve a conference room or reserve an outdoor space. So you've got it at your fingertips, or, what we saw in Shanghai was that a lot of people stopped going out to eat lunch. And so they started to use their applications and ordering just like we do here. But we saw a huge trend on that. And so we can see that, having your phone and being able to do so many different activities and the way to connect, we see this as a huge aspect, and being able to just have a broader perspective, and also keeping that safety in mind, where if there's something happening in that building and maybe in your office somebody got sick, you're informed immediately. So it's really about having that information hands-on and in real time. That's probably one of the biggest aspects. So and with that in mind, we're in this virtual world. I'm working out of my bedroom today. And, what is tomorrow going to be? Probably 1 or 2 days in the office, 3 days in the office, and making those visits really purposeful. And, what does the future look like in terms of this work? Maybe we'll have, fully drivable electric cars and, be the only person in that car and working and connecting with other people, popping into the office for a couple of hours and then heading on back and doing focus work at home. Maybe you have this sort of mobile, transformable office space at home that can function as multiple, it serves multiple needs, and but you still have the office to connect, and it really becomes about the culture of that company, right? Is we know that at the top of everything is really about the talent that companies are hiring. That's still very important. And, we see that people are being hired from different locations. You can be, in Montana, you could be in Poughkeepsie, New York, and still work for that company, in Arizona or Austin. So it's fascinating that we are seeing, people get hired, and it's no longer relevant, where you live. And it's really about that hybrid and flexible working mode. So, maybe the future will be sort of a Jetson sort of city, when you get in your plane or whatever, your electric car, and you can be in the office immediately and you're by yourself, or you can be with people. So I think it's going to be interesting. Jennifer or Bonnie, do you guys want to add anything else to closing thoughts?
I just wanted to mention, it's that opportunity to dare to dream with companies and employees. Everyone is coming to the table with these brilliant ideas, and we're in the space to just really be able to explore them. Everyone's been so open, and so I think that's the future is very bright when it comes to us coming back into the office and how that all takes place. Bonnie?
Yeah, I'll say one thing just in terms of the themes is I'm seeing a lot of conversation about new skill sets that are rising to the surface as important during a time of working from home or thinking about hybrid work. The ability to self-manage, although I would argue that the ability to manage remotely is equally important. You can't put all the pressure on the employee, especially if they are earlier in their careers. The importance of setting boundaries, and also some practical skills around using technology as well in order to be efficient and effective remotely. So that seems like a theme around how do companies support some of these kind of personal skill sets growing so that both balance and productivity is supported.
Right, right.
So questions before we even jump to that. We're going to reflect on this experiment in a second, but do you all have any questions you'd like to ask us or any comments? And I consider you all the Greek chorus, and I will read them out and share them with the group. Yeah, I think there's some questions around as we look to the future around this virus or future viruses that are airborne, how would this work? And someone said, better HVAC systems, air control or filtering. Certainly we are seeing a rise in awareness around HVAC and really thinking about the quality of air in buildings. I spent the last year in Europe, and in Europe, there are more sealed homes and sealed offices in the United States, whereas in Europe, in my lease contract, I actually had to air out my house every day. That was written into my lease. So there's a culture of having windows that open. So offices are more able in Europe to open up their windows and are facing challenges here, schools as well, with the lack of windows that open. Mm-hmm. So it's Bonnie, both HVAC systems and it's the ability to get fresh air into a space.
That's right. I also wanted to add to that when it comes to schools in particular, speaking with one of our MEP partners here in town, they were talking about with a longer contract that they've been working with schools under construction, in particular, the systems for at least the last 10 years in some of the newer districts around our area have actually been implementing some of the most upgradable HVAC systems. So that was music to my ears as a parent, knowing that our kiddos are in school at this time and knowing that they're trying to be as safe as possible.
Any other questions? Okay, we can come back to some questions. I'm going to take a moment. Everyone's asking if they can get a copy of this presentation because I had lots of good insights and would like to digest it a little bit further.
And also on our website, we can share it out through Maddie. We've got a whole page where all the results from our research have been gathered. It just got posted. So it's, like I said, it's done by industries, really fascinating data. So you can check it out there.
Great. Another question. Are you seeing an actual current decline in new office planning, design, permitting, or simply a rethinking of the same kind of ground up retrofit kind of deal flow of last several years? I know we're seeing a range. There's quite a wide range of things going on, but Nana, maybe you can comment on that.
We haven't necessarily, there was a pause, right? Especially like May and June, it was just, there was no phone calls, no developer was, considering doing anything. They just wanted to see what was going to happen. But since then, especially in July, August, we have seen a change. And, people, the developers and folks that we're already working with, they are asking us to redesign the way the buildings are being designed. And again, adding more of those mid spaces or outdoor spaces and how the flow of the space from the lobby into elevators, where, before newer buildings had dispatch elevators. Well, we're seeing that on any new buildings, they're thinking about, you know, how you can call your elevator, you have 1 or 2 people in that and that's it. So we are seeing a lot of activity. I think there is a desire to get back out there and create more. So
I'll say, sitting in consulting and thinking about office culture and the use of technology, that while there was quiet on the building front, for us, there's been a huge spike in helping to think about how do we imagine not just what happens when we return to work in the midst of this crisis, but post-vaccine, like how should we choreograph flexibility? How do we need to transform our culture to support employee expectations? So we were quite busy and are still in trying to help with that kind of process of transformation that's going on in all workplaces. A couple of other questions. How might this affect workers who are now potentially competing with remote talent internationally? I'll comment that we are seeing that companies do see the opportunity to be able to bring people in who might not have been considered before because they don't reside in the city where their headquarters are located or where their offices are located. But we're also, so they're weighing those options. At the same time, I don't think any employer is necessarily saying, there's not value in getting together in the future. So I think it'll be a balanced approach to that. And I do think, yes, might seem scary to feel like you're competing with the entire world, but I don't think that's quite the case. I think there still is value in being in the same city, even if it may not be a make or break decision about who you choose to hire. Okay, questions are rolling in. With the future of the distributed workplace, how do you predict companies will respond in terms of cities they reside? Pinterest famously abandoned San Francisco, losing 90 million in the process, and could just as easily reaffirm their office in a much cheaper municipality. What will keep companies in high-cost cities? Or is the rise of the young city, which is also more attractive for housing prices for young professionals, on the horizon? Great question.
great question. So all the articles that I'm seeing and reading is, you know, there's a huge exodus of folks, especially younger folks, leaving the bigger cities like San Francisco and New York City. I think you're going to see a variety of companies doing that when they look at their operating costs, their leases, you know, what it takes to run a company in San Francisco or New York versus, you know, even somewhere in Texas, you know, San Antonio, Austin. It's so much more attractive. And so we're seeing that influx. There's plenty of articles in LinkedIn right now of where we're getting all the folks that are coming into Austin. It's fascinating to see that the top 3, you know, are New York, San Francisco, and the other one I think was DC. And so I think we're going to see a variety of things, and those big cities are going to have to make some adjustments, you know. But I do think that, you know, there's a certain attractive aspect of certain talent that will still remain in the big cities like New York and San Francisco. You know, it's not going to be just completely wiped out, but I think there's opportunity for smaller cities to continue to grow.
Another good question, actually a couple of questions in this, so I'll try to synthesize them into one, is knowing that we're leaning into a potential hybrid workforce in the future, do we foresee companies downsizing their real estate footprints? And are we seeing that happening now? And is that the right move?
So we're seeing some reduction, you know, 10, 15, 20%. We've got a few clients that we're working with doing some strategy, trying to determine and assess, you know, what makes sense and how many people are going to be coming into the office, what days, and how that works not only with our culture, but in terms of the layering of the staff and their workforce. And so I think every company needs to look at their own individual situation. But I do think that there will be a reduction because, hey, you know, if you used to have 100,000 and you can get away with 75,000, you've reduced a good chunk of your operating costs and still, you know, maintaining the productivity that you need. So we will see some of that. And other companies are just going to redesign their spaces so that they are, you know, purposeful, and it will be attractive for people to come into the office. So
yeah, I
we'll
think
see.
a third scenario is I have a client I'm working with right now who's talking about who knows that they will have less people in the office on any given day than pre-COVID. And they're looking at how they can use that space and give it back to the community. So as well as others, you know, who are just repurposing the space. So moving away from a desk farm to purposes where you can have a more kind of open and, as they say, hospitality-like experience. So I think that's the other question that's on the table, and we see being explored, but it hasn't been activated yet, is looking at more distributed hubs of activity. So that instead of having a single hub where everyone goes to, you have a series of smaller hubs, more co-working like, where people might come in and out of so that they don't have to work from home, nor do they have to have a long commute to work somewhere else. So that's another model that'll be interesting to see how it plays out in the future. Are companies still able to provide employees with personal protection equipment like masks, antibacterial gel, and wipes even after the vaccine? So that's sort of a question about after we get past this moment, which is certainly consuming for us when we think about returning to work and the risk has been mitigated, will we continue to see lingering effects of and needs to provide more protective gear in the office space and for employees?
I certainly feel like that is going to be a part of the narrative for a while to come. You know, I think so much as this is going to go into, you know, the healthcare realm as well, and you know, what the guidelines are going to be coming from, you know, higher up than even those companies. But there's a level of safety. We've talked about wellness that I think is going to be very important for us to all feel comfortable coming back into the office in whatever amount of space and time. So.
Yeah, I also think that I mean, this is not based in our research, but this is just my own point of view. I think people often would come into the office sick in the past, like with a cold or whatever. I don't think that's going to be happening anymore.
No.
I think and I think that's a wonderful cultural change. It's like, if you're sick, even if it's just a cold, please stay at home. And I think that will stay. And instead of making you choose, can I work that day or not? You may need to take the day off, but maybe you just have a cold. Just stay home and work from home. That's not even going to be a debate anymore.
It's going to be a nice change. I think that's
some
of the silver lining, right?
Please stay home with your cold.
Right. Because we live in such a competitive environment. Our culture is really focused on, you know, who can produce the most. Oh, I'm coming in sick, but I'm still putting in, you know, 12 hours. And I think that kind of thinking is going away.
So I'm going to actually pause and ask us to step out of the presentation itself. And I'd love to get some feedback. I mean, this is an experiment for us in thinking about how we might start to activate remote participation. And in this case, we're thinking about all hands meetings. So when we return and you have a % of people in the office in an all hands meeting, and you have a % of people who are dialing in at home, how do we make those people not feel like second-class citizens? So while this isn't a hybrid event, unfortunately, since we're still in the midst of this virus, we are sort of trying to simulate it a little bit to see, is there a way to kind of activate people more who are remote and make them feel, and actually not just make them feel, but engage them more in the presentation. So I'd love to hear your feedback either right now or after the fact about how you thought this experiment went, and how we might be able to think about making our conferences and our all hands meetings and any of these giant broadcast events more engaging for people who might be remote. Yeah, interesting. Someone saying, you know, how does this translate to education in schools? Some of these ideas. And I think there's a lot of dialogue. There's definitely some unique differences and a lot of similarities. I would say that the digital component of school is, or online learning is a more evolved sector than that in workplace in many ways. At the same time, it doesn't mean that it's been brought together successfully in a sort of traditional school setting in all ways, maybe more at higher education than at the elementary school. So lots of opportunities for those, both in workplace and in school, to weave together those things more successfully.
I think it's fascinating, Bonnie, how teachers right now are conducting classes virtually and in school.
Yes.
And so to me, it's just amazing to see my first grader in, doing it virtually and then seeing half of his class, there with masks. It's just, it's got to be daunting for the teachers, but it's certainly, they're ahead of it in a way because they're having that hybrid learning mode.
Great. Someone else is just commenting how other platforms, especially, and these are some discussions we've had internally, like Twitch, so how gaming platforms might be something we look to as we think about engaging and making more rich remote interactions that are both hybrid, some people maybe live and others not. We're using that for some of our testing that we're doing right now. We're using both a live feed on Twitch as well as in parallel a more Zoom, using those in parallel to do very large scale media testing in Dallas on a media wall right now. And it's amazing to see the computer setup so you can see the actual live stream, the actual physical space, the digital components all at once. So yes, I think there's a lot to be learned from some of these gaming platforms. Oh, and volume, it's interesting. Some people are saying, the importance of being able to hear everyone and offices needing more robust audiovisual setup for meetings. Offices aren't really quite ready for this, I think people are saying. Yeah, and the repurposing.
And home.
This is great, yeah.
Great. Okay, there was a question. I'm going to have to scroll back. There was a question that someone hoped we'd answer. We're nearing the end of time about internal gardens. Oh, like how much we're seeing bringing in internal gardens and kind of plants and elements into the workspace in relationship to wellness. I hope I got that right. I wasn't able to capture the specific question with the stream here, but.
Yeah, so the idea of biophilic elements and natural elements into the space, absolutely. That's kind of a big one. We designed Etsy headquarters in New York, and that was, this is way before COVID, about 2 years ago when we started with them, and that space is just, the focus is the bringing the outdoors to the indoors and really bringing it so that you feel like you're in a in a garden. So I think we're going to see more of that. It's also, helping the indoor air quality. You're going to see more of that. So it's all for the better.
And there's one more question coming in about equity and career development as we think about people who might be working remotely. And have we explored that or been asked to look into it? I will say it's definitely come up in the work that I'm doing around culture and how to evolve your culture to support a hybrid work environment. It's definitely coming up a lot, meaning HR is aware of it and actively thinking about it. So I don't know. I think there's a range of different ways you can address that and answer it that are more holistic. It's not just about